The role of leadership is to intentionally care about the things necessary to lead a culture that's critical for the strategy and to hire people with the beliefs and the values critical to the culture. So that right strategy, right culture, right people was fundamental to me.
The New Zealand Business Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, your strategic and proactive IT partner.
I'm your host, Paul Spain, futurist and chief executive at Gorilla Technology. I love to see individuals and their organisations thrive, and the New Zealand Business Podcast is all about this, helping you learn from our most innovative and tenacious leaders. Today, I'm joined by Nick Astwick, the outgoing chief executive at Southern Cross Health Society. Nick's story encompasses his journey from Christchurch schoolboy with a dream of joining the police force to an impressive management and leadership career in New Zealand and the United Kingdom. Nick's drive, grit and determination assisted him in each role, whether it be helping launch the Kiwibank brand, his rise through the ranks to become their chief operating officer in 2012, before he took on the chief executive role at Southern Cross Health Society in 2017. We also hear about what's ahead following his recent resignation from leading Southern Cross. The New Zealand Business Podcast is proudly brought to you by One New Zealand and Gorilla Technology. Before we jump into the interview, a quick question to ponder. How confident are you that your mid-size or smaller organisation is appropriately leveraging artificial intelligence and other tech? And have you got your house in order from a cybersecurity perspective? If you're not sure, get in touch with Gorilla Technology today to learn how a tech or cybersecurity audit could help you. All right, let's jump in. All right, well, greetings and welcome along to the podcast. Great privilege to have Nick Astwick joining us today. How are you, Nick?
I'm great, Paul, and thanks for having me today. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, always like to start at the beginning. So tell us a little bit around where you were born, where you grew up.
Well, I was lucky enough to be brought up in Christchurch in Canterbury, so I had the classic provincial upbringing in the South Island, on the sports fields of Christchurch.
Fantastic.
In the cold and I guess the nor'westers, but very lucky. I had a great childhood growing up in provincial New Zealand, born in 73, left there about 94, 95.
Fantastic. So what were the hallmarks when you look back at those sort of younger years of the things that you got stuck into that maybe are connected a bit with later life, whether it's leadership, work, business, other kind of interests that you'd see kind of connecting up?
Well, on reflection, I do trace a lot of the way I roll in my life today, whether it's as CEO of Southern Cross, from that provincial upbringing. I mean, I think we've all done those, tests around how you think. And I've got an achiever mindset, so I've always been intentional, wanting to achieve. And that's come from the sports fields, I believe, and a competitive sport. In provincial New Zealand, relationships do matter, whether it's on the sports fields with others. So the ability to build relationships and work collectively is critical, I think, to leadership today. So sort of that intentionality, the ability to work with others, that ability to, I guess, that community and cause has, shaped, I guess, a lot of my leadership career today. Mm. And so, it's been a great privilege, but it's actually been quite foundational.
So when you look back, tell us what did that sort of sports journey look like? What sports did you play, and how did you do?
Well, I was into everything, basically. I was a Christchurch Boys High lad, so in the sort of, when was that? That was 87 to 91. The Mertons and the Chris Cairnses of those days went through Christchurch Boys. And so I played a lot of cricket, loved cricket, first 11, played a lot of football in those days for clubs. I ended up playing a lot of indoor cricket at those times, but it was triathlons and things like that. And though I think Christchurch was a wonderful place to be active, and I gave it all. And it was it wasn't just the achievement in the sport, it was doing it with others. That's what I loved. I love team sports, the ability, and I sort of deeply understand in the Crusaders' philosophy, a champion team will always beat a team of champions. And I believe that to be absolutely true. The culture of a team, the growth mindset, the challenging pursuit of excellence, the confronting the stuff that's stopping us being excellent, but in a acknowledgement, not judgment way is critical. And so sport gave me that.
And did you build something of a work ethic in terms of doing jobs and work as a youngster?
Yeah, I did the paper round. I was the Tuesday to Thursday hour, rain, hail or shine, and Christchurch had it all.
Oh yes,
I would get out there,
days.
but I was brought up in a family that worked hard. I think that work ethic came from, your values are largely and your beliefs are formed in those earlier years, and they're formed by the experiences you have. And so I was lucky enough to get great values. I hated going out at times, but I did it. And so there was that really strong work ethic around the paper round. I worked, umpiring indoor cricket, which was late at night. So it was really, my school was everything, but I would do the odd jobs around there. My first real gig, though, was with the National Bank in Island Branch University, Canterbury.
Yeah, okay. Well, tell us about your university time, your study.
It was one of those ones here that sort of fell into, I wanted to stay at the University of Canterbury, a lot of my mates were there. I sort of, from school, I had this bent for business, and so commerce was the obvious thing that I wanted to do. I did a side of Japanese. I'd studied Japanese through high school, and I wanted to keep that going. And I did spend 6 months on a ski field in Japan to really practice it. But having that sort of yin and yang of business and I guess learning language and culture was really powerful for me. But, I was very intentional around a commerce degree. I didn't want to be an accountant. I sort of majored in accountancy and things like that. So as you well know, I was sort of doing that in the pursuit of this sort of weird idea that I would become a detective at some point and a policeman. And then I sort of gapped a job, in the National Bank, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So, tell us about that, what that looked like to get that role at National Bank, and, what you were doing right at the beginning.
Oh, right at the beginning, I was a teller, I was sort of a young bloke in Canterbury, commerce degree, saw an opportunity at the National Bank and just seized it. So, I spent, I think, 6 months as a teller, and I fell in love with, I guess, the service ethic, serving others. I really actually enjoyed. And, I got yelled at for asking somebody who's been there for 30 years for their ID, but actually learning from that was critical. So I fell in love with, first, the sense of service. I actually really enjoyed financial services. I think not the products of financial services, but the impact of it, the ability to have people in homes or to build their wealth creation or just survive university. And actually really enjoyed the financial services componentry of that.
You'd mentioned this interest in joining the police force. How strong was that, and at what point did it tweak in your mind that actually, you weren't going to, pursue being in the police?
I think the quality of thinking was quite low, in that one. I did it because I sort of grew up with a lot of the Christchurch boys' high dads were in the police. And so there was that sort of hero, I want to be like that. But it dissipated pretty quickly. It dissipated pretty quickly. I think I found my love in the service and financial services pretty quickly.
And what did it, take for you to, progress within the banking environment?
I think there was, I guess my achievement mindset was there. So 6 months teller, banking consultant, so it was probably 18 months in the branch, loved every moment of it. But when I saw the product manager role in Wellington, I said that was for me. And so really I was quite ambitious in that sort of stuff, as you are when you're a bit younger. I said, okay, I want to make more of this. And so I applied for that role in Wellington and got that out of the branch.
Was that the first different thing that you applied for?
Yeah, that was actually the first one I applied for. I love the ethos of the National Bank. It was about customers first. We're here to serve. They really understood the value driver in banking is actually tenure of customers, not margin. They were very people-centric to serve customers, so they really understood look after the people, look after the customer, look after the shareholder. So I felt like that was a culture that I could be myself in. Yeah, and so it was I said, that's the brand I want to work for. What's the next gig? And it was that one in Wellington.
And who was it within the bank that taught you that? How did you learn that was what the bank was all about? That was the culture. How easy was that picked up?
Very easy. I mean, I think what I've learned in my career is culture is the critical success factor, not just a good one, but the right one for the strategy. And my definition of culture is what does the leadership care about? That is the culture of any organisation. And so what I got to see at a very young age, I had access to the leadership of National Bank, and you could tell very, very quickly what they care about, because it is the context for their decisions. And, the culture of the National Bank was very visible through the actions and choices of the leadership.
And was this access to the leadership once you had moved to Wellington?
To Wellington, to the head office, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I had about 3 years or so, in Wellington for the National Bank. And the National Bank and the learnings in those 3 years still is in the frontal lobe of my leadership today.
Fantastic. It was the senior leadership that you were really able to learn from, or was it across the board? Because how many layers of people were there? I guess, it wasn't such a big enterprise as our banks are today, right?
No, yeah, I can't remember. I probably was 4th or 5th level down. It was sort of mid-management in those days. But I can tell you, at the ripe old age of 22, I was looking after the whole deposit side, which is half of the retail bank. Yep, wow. At a very young age. Wow. And so I had access to the treasurer, I had access to the head of the retail bank, and so it was a very tight, but it was a very flat structure in that sort of sense. And so access to leadership was pretty obvious. I was green as anything, as you can imagine, but I had a growth mindset. I just wanted to consume and learn just how it worked at that point in time.
Yeah. And then what was next after that 3 years in Wellington?
Well, I wanted to do the classic OE, so I did the classic OE. I left in 1998, went to London. My dad's a Yorkshireman, and so I had the British passport, and so I spent 5 years in total with the 2 stints, over in London, and loved every moment of it. I worked for UBS Warburg, the investment bank there. We did some cool stuff like the euro conversion program that was, trillions of legacy currency positions had to turn into the euro in a 12-hour window, and it was only Kiwis, South Africans and Aussies crazy enough to take on that challenge.
I remember doing a little bit of work in London, and it seemed to be sort of, Kiwis, Aussies and South Africans were very well, sought after, and in fact I did some work at a bank as well, but
right.
mine was a very short, stint in between things. So that sounds like, some real pressure to get that right.
It is, but it was my first exposure to, I guess, a non-movable program where you've got to build a culture that has to deliver successfully. I mean, the stakes are pretty high if you don't. Yeah. And we did it. And so I felt like at that point in time, it was a really good learning of what it takes on one of those sort of critical projects to get it right.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you think you took away from that experience?
Well, it's very similar to the sporting analogy. You got to know what good looks like. What is success, well defined. You've actually got to build a team that fundamentally is not. I think we're about 60 in that team. That doesn't work in 60 different directions. It has to be bought in to the cause and the purpose and the outcome. And so therefore it has to work, as a collective, not as a set of individuals. And so that leadership is fundamentally into that one. It had to have a good dose of 2 things. It had to have a good dose of management, the how, how are we going to do it? But it also had to have a good dose of leadership. Yeah, it had to get people to rise up, to achieve the outcome, and you had to be motivated and willing, to put in all your discretionary support to do that one. And so I probably learnt for the first time the difference between leadership and management at that point in time. And so that was the lessons that was certainly learnt there.
And so how do you define that today in terms of the difference between leadership and management?
Well, if you look at leadership and management, fundamentally critical bedfellows, but leadership is ultimately about the why and what. It is around the medium to long term. It is around people and motivation. Whereas management is about the how. It is about the execution of plans and the development of plans with sort of discipline. And so, one is about setting the direction and why we're going there. The other is how we're going to deliver it. And so, for me, that sort of shone the light on the difference between those two.
And what did the rest of that time in the UK look like?
Well, I kept working for UBS Warburg. I did a little bit of strategy for them around their operational excellence. And I think being a product manager, a marketer per se, in both of those, my role was really marketing, which is around the product, the price, the distribution, how you're going to sell, the 4 Ps. And so that is a lot of strategy. Operations jobs were really about doing tasks. When you were young into a national bank around the deposits and you had to raise $2 billion a year, you've got to start learning strategy. You've got to learn about developing a strategy to generate those outcomes. And so the gift I got through those jobs was being a good marketer, a good strategist. That's what I learnt over that period of time. And that's probably some of the skill sets that I've taken into my later career.
What were the biggest pressures that were on you at that time?
Well, I think the Euro program was it was sort of a binary success or failure. I think the big pressures on me was really the quality of my work. I had a high standard, and I'm unapologetic for that. I do. In those early years, I felt like my self-worth was attached to my work worth. If I was successful at work, I was successful as a human. Now that unravelled a little bit in my later life, and I needed to put a healthy attachment to that. But that's what I measured my self-worth on. Was I successful at work? And so I'd always strive for high standards. I was also always strive to make sure that I produced what was sought by the leadership of the organisation, but I was all in.
Yeah. What was it that brought you to the end of that overseas experience and decided to bring you home?
My love of home, really. I mean, I worked 5 years for the UBS Warburg in 2 stints. I had a little stint back home, but I don't think I heard the word customer mentioned that often. And so for me, I was a bit disillusioned with the machinery of banking and the politics of it. I had to make a decision at that point in time with now my wife is where do we want to spend our lives? And for me, I thought long and hard about, 20 years in London, working for the man, as they say, or actually coming back home and making a dent for New Zealand. And that was my personal context. I was very lucky to meet Sam Knowles and Paul Brock, and Kiwibank had just started. I was looking for a startup, and that was a real fortuitous sort of meeting at that point in time.
Yeah, so tell us how that came about.
Well, I landed back in New Zealand looking for a startup. We wanted to spend our time back in Christchurch again. That was in Wellington. So it was a very short move to Wellington. But when I heard about the opportunity to set up not just a bank, but a brand, that was rooted in the prosperity of New Zealand, one Kiwi after another, and that no one wanted a bank, my marketing sort of just fired. I said, okay, this is a wonderful once-in-a-life opportunity. It may fail miserably, but I wanted to be part of something that was significant for New Zealand. And at that time, that was Kiwibank.
Yeah. For those that don't know, you probably can remind us who was it, one political party or a particular politician that kind of really pushed for that to happen?
Yeah, it was Jim Anderton in those days.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, but also too, New Zealand Post had a business strategy for its relevance, around, okay, how can it diversify? So there was the New Zealand Post diversification business strategy met Jim Anderton, from a political perspective, and the rest was history at that point in time. I mean, it didn't have the nation behind it. It didn't have all the politicians behind it. Yeah, it was one of those, no one wanted another bank in New Zealand. And actually, I don't think New Zealand saw banking as strategic at that point in time. But remember, in 2002, the only innovations really in banking was an ATM. If you think about, and I go 2002, there was no mobile phones, there was no text messaging, there was no open the bank 24/7. It was still locked into the 9 till 4. And so you think in just 24 years, just the transformation of banking through the digital age was quite bad. And I saw that ride through. Kiwibank actually challenged banking and what it stood for, not the banks. And so it was first with mobile banking, it was first with text banking, it was open 7 days a week in some parts. So it really sort of challenged, that psyche and the tradition of banking at that point in time.
Right. So where was Kiwibank at when you joined? How far along in the development?
It was about 8 or 9 months, I think. It could have been somewhere between 6 and 12 months from landing in market. Yeah, sort of still in post-project phase.
Yeah.
But I would just say it had just launched. Yeah, and so I got that crazy 5 years of the startup. Then there was a 5 years of, oh my God, we need to actually turn this into a successful business, because a successful startup and a great business are not the same thing. And so we had to go through that growing pains phase. And look, I've been out of Kiwibank since 2017, but I'm still very proud, that there is a Kiwibank. I think banking is really important for all banks in New Zealand. It's still really important. It does be a fuel of prosperity for those who want to seek it. And so, it's great to have that as part of our banking landscape.
And how hard was it to build a culture and an environment where you're building this bank, but there's really the connection into New Zealand Post in terms of the New Zealand Post staff being the front end rather than, I guess what you experienced at National Bank, where, there was a very clear culture, across the board, whereas I guess you've got this kind of, crossing of two entities. Maybe you can just walk us through, what that looked like to build out the culture.
No, I think it was very, very intentional from day one. I mean, I believe personally that Kiwibank would have failed if we just tried to compete against the individual banks with better products. Yeah, I mean, we had to build a brand first. Yeah, we had to build something. What do we stand for and what do we stand against? And so we were sort of challenging sort of the notion of banking and how it's been New Zealanders have been underserved. I mean, that was what we were challenging against. So we had to build a brand first. The cultures of the two organisations were completely separated from day one.
Right.
So yes, you could see that Kiwibank lived in a New Zealand Post branch for a while there, but actually behind the scenes it was completely separate. And that was very intentional. We needed a certain culture that was different from New Zealand's Post culture to be successful. And so that was separate. So I think the leadership of the bank was very intentional around what culture do we need to be successful in market, and they designed for that.
Mm-hmm. And then how did that play out when you had the branches sort of operating, I guess, using New Zealand Post staff? Is that how that
well, certainly,
worked?
exactly right. I mean, it's been almost unheard of that a bank can start up and be profitable by year 3. And Kiwibank was, and people forget that. No bank has stood up and be profitable in year 3. That was because we could, leverage the infrastructure of the Post network from a physical sense. And so it was actually, a variable cost to Kiwibank and a marginal cost to New Zealand Post was was quite sort of innovative in those days. I mean, when you look at successful scale businesses today, they partner well. Yep, that is the growth rate. They don't try and do everything. And so, we started with $80 million worth of seed money. Yep. And we became profitable by year 3 or 4 or something like that. And so that was because we were smart around the business model. Now, obviously, quite rightly, the decisions you make at startup are different in time. And as you can see, tell you what, the branch network model has fundamentally been disrupted over the last 20-odd years. And so I think it was a great entry point, and it allowed us to evolve the bank over time. And actually, the great thing about New Zealand Post was just about in every single region, and every single town, and a large amount of the suburbs of the country. So we could get reach very, very quickly.
Yeah. When you look back at that initial kind of startup phase, what was the biggest challenge that you were facing at that time?
Oh, terminal failure. It was, wasn't it? It was. Yeah. It wasn't like there was a million New Zealanders saying, "I need a bank." It was a binary outcome. This was either going to be a success or it was going to be a dismal failure. And so, but something, might be blind ignorance, but actually something within a small few amount of people wanted to sign up for that job, a little bit like the Euro program. Yeah. And I think what I've learnt in myself, while I have achiever mindset, I do have a reimagining mindset. I do, can see a vision, want to be part of something that is meaningful. And so I signed up to that. But you had to be very intentional and disciplined. And, I learned in my early marketing career that the market buys different. It doesn't buy better. And so you had to be very clear about how you were different. And that, building a brand that sort of had the Kiwi psyche, challenging banking, creating a cause and a purpose, and delivering, great experiences at the time that were different was really a little bit of the recipe of success. But I was just part of a team of 100, that really did that. But it was one of my favourite times by far.
And so, what was your role at the outset?
I just started, I was largely came in doing some of the market componentry for them, head of markets, rapidly moved to running sort of the consumer division. And so it was a rapid rise through the ranks. But it's one of those classic things. You go away for London, you do some big stuff, and New Zealanders go, well, that doesn't really matter. Like London experience is not seen by a Kiwi as anything valuable. And so it was really just getting in on that ground floor and then just going for it. And so, as I say, I was on the executive team, I think there around about 2007. And so I had 10 years as part of the leadership team at Kiwibank.
Yeah, fantastic. And what were the key learnings over that, that period for you? What were the things when you look back now that laid the foundations for moving into leading Southern Cross and the work that you've done there?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it was developing my leadership competency. I was still a manager for a long, long period of time. So what I learned is sort of how to lead a culture, a culture that was right for the strategy at that point in time. So that was clear. What I learned largely through my Kiwibank days is the role of leadership is to intentionally care about the things necessary to lead a culture that's critical for the strategy, and to hire people with the beliefs and the values critical to the culture. So that right strategy, right culture, right people was fundamental to me. But I also learned that leadership, there's 3 big traits, and I learnt that through Kiwibank and Leadership New Zealand. When I look at great leaders, they're very intentional. They take action. They don't stand on the side. They actually sometimes have to get in unpopularly, and they have to lead, and they have to put themselves in vulnerable positions, but they do take action. Great leaders are very self-aware. They understand thyself, the good and the bad of it. They understand, and they play to their strengths. And they can understand their vulnerabilities and weaknesses, and they put teams around that. And the third thing, they are very reflective. They learn from their mistakes. They can adjust their style in different circumstances. And I think for me, Kiwibank, Leadership New Zealand, sort of ground what good leadership looks like. And actually, how do you make a high growth business? How do you actually cut through and get high growth? But also, too, successful startup is not a great business. And I learned that from sort of the great leadership of Kiwibank and the National Bank in those days too.
Mm. Now, you talked about self-awareness. How did you develop that?
I think lots of people can tell you. Well, I think first you've got to care about it. Do I know thyself? I mean, we all go through hundreds and hundreds of assessments, but you've got to, once you wise up a little bit, you think in the young age you can do everything, and you learn pretty quickly that playing the same style in a different situation turns into failure. And so you've got to refine your leadership style and your impact. And so that only comes from reflection. Why did that not work? Okay, I led in this way. And so I think you've got to have a growth mindset. You've got to confront the realities of failure, and you've got to really then refine and deliver that into the future. So for me, just big learning journey and good doses of reality.
And how do you help others recognise that maybe they need to become a bit more self-aware along the way? Have you got that?
Well, it is charity with clarity. I mean, one of my swing thoughts is, how do you treat everyone with respect but be clinical in what you expect? I mean, if you genuinely care about somebody, then you'll help them be better. I feel like that's the role of a leader, is always to be a coach, is to get... I mean, a coach is trying to get from within somebody the greatest potential, and you need to be able to help people understand their strengths and weaknesses and support them. But that's got to come from acknowledgement, not judgment. It's got to come from care, not critique.
Now, you mentioned earlier around understanding where your self-worth comes from, and that, initially that was probably tied very closely to your sort of success in the workplace. How did you evolve that, your thinking in that area over time? Were there any particular, triggers for you, or things when you look back that helped you to develop that understanding that, you should have self-worth, regardless of what's happening in terms of career and so on?
I just developed a very unhealthy attachment to work. I started with, like most young people do, you have successes in your early career, and then when you get higher up the stack, there's failures. You can't control everything at that point in time, and so then you get drawn down. So my whole self-worth sort of collapsed when failures. I am not great. I got quite vulnerable, sort of, in a sense. And so I actually, with a coach, had to say, why am I feeling like that? And he pointed out that I had an unhealthy attachment to work. And so pretty much from that moment on, I separated my two worlds. And in my role as CEO, I often say, the business has got this challenge and the business has got this success, nothing to do with me. And so you've actually got to learn to put big distance between that. But if you've got a healthy attachment to work, you can really critique it. You can, and I think one of the roles of the CEO is to define reality and give hope. You've got to be able to hold the truth, what is actually going on, because everyone in your organisation sees it. If the CEO doesn't see it, it's optimistic or pessimistic. And so having a healthy attachment allows me to define the reality of what's going on. And then it allows me to objectively go, give hope as what's the good strategy, what are the good plans, what are the good decisions, and to give hope in the form of taking good action. And so I had to learn the hard way around a healthy attachment. But I see that in a lot of young people today. It's not that they're highly IQ, they're very intelligent, they're very intentional, but they've got an unhealthy attachment that their whole self-worth is attached to their work worth, and that does unravel. And so I try and help them sort of separate those two worlds.
Yeah, fantastic. Can you share a little bit about what the circumstance was that that brought you to that point where you got a coach and you relooked at things?
Well, it's just a culmination of things that don't turn out well, whether the system changes that do that, or the market, or there's people, that you make judgment calls on that don't turn out. So you go, oh my God, that they're not all successful. And what I probably, that's where the learnings are in the tough moments, I can tell you. Yeah. And so there was a lot of learning there, but there was actually, it was a culmination of many, many things over time. Yeah.
And so that was obviously quite a key learning from from those tough moments. Were there any other kind of key learnings that came out at that time, where you got a coach and so on, going through these things? As you've said, there's lots of learnings in there. What else could you share?
Well, I think, again, it was really about what leader are you going to be? Yeah, it's like a lot of people come, I want to be the CEO. And my first question is, well, why do you want to be a CEO? And secondly is, what CEO are you going to be? And thirdly, what organisation are you going to be the best CEO you can possibly? And then they haven't even thought about those sorts of things. And so I think my leadership career had taught me, be intentional, be self-aware, and be highly reflective. And I knew that I would only be a great CEO in a certain brand or a certain culture or with a certain strategy. I mean, I can play politics like everyone else, but I'm not at my best. Yeah. And so that was a little bit of the story of Southern Cross, really, was, I went for a CEO gig, and I thought, they're going to look at my weaknesses, and I'll in my interview, I'll manage my weaknesses and say all these right technical things. Yeah. But I blew it. Yeah. I tried to be the person I thought that they were seeking.
Right.
Yeah. And they could see straight through that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then again, failure, learned from that. And so then when I had the opportunity to the CEO, in fact, I went to INSEAD and did the advanced management program in Fontainebleau there. And a large part of it was thinking about the leader, you should be, about sort of what potential have you got and how can you realise that. And so I came back from Fontainebleau with a sense that I just don't want to be a CEO for the sake of being a CEO title. What I want to do is lead an organisation that's got this type of impact and meaning. And I think I'll be the best leader in this type of culture. And so when I got to Southern Cross and I saw the opportunity of Southern Cross, I said, if you want somebody else, fantastic, but this is the leader you're going to get. And I could do it with humility and I could do it with clarity, but it was quite empowering not to, again, say I must try and be the CEO there. I could be authentic and say, this is the CEO you're going to get. I think it's right, for the time here. And as history would show, they managed to give me the job, which was wonderful. And this is, as I say, to have the National Bank, to have Kiwibank, and to have Southern Cross, I feel very blessed.
Oh, fantastic. And so when you went into Southern Cross, that was 2017?
Yes.
Yeah. And so what were those things that made you, feel that this was a really good alignment for you, and that this was going to be good for everybody?
Well, I think I grew up with Southern Cross. My mum and dad didn't have a lot of money, but one thing they did care was the health and our education, and so Southern Cross was in my life. Not that I needed it. No one needs health insurance. When you're young, really. But what it taught me is it was a brand that was really meaningful at that point in time. So that was born in 1961, Southern Cross. I was born in 1973, so it was still, an early part of that. Mm-hmm. Of course, I surrendered it when I was in my 20s and bulletproof, but I came back to, remember, health is actually quite meaningful and has a huge resonance. And so a large amount of New Zealanders say, actually, I want to have some sort of control about access to health when I need it. I care deeply about it. It's a little bit like private education. And there's more and more of your normal Kiwis caring about that. And so for me, The first thing was it was a brand of significance and meaning. I just come out of Kiwibank and National Bank, so it was a brand of significance and meaning. I knew nothing about health at that time, but I knew that it was powerful and it had a huge resonance, mortgages and health, there was a difference there. But I also thought it was quite a heritage brand. It needed a dose of contemporization and energy. And if it was going to be around for another 60 years, it had to really confront its brand, its proposition, and how it was going to be relevant for New Zealanders. And I felt like I could help with that. And so, I'm coming up sort of just over 9 years. This is the best job I've had. And I have probably really learned about the health sector, but the fusion between financial services and health has been wonderful. But this is a meaningful brand for New Zealanders. I mean, we fund 3.8 million health events every year. A lot of people can complain to me about the price of it, but we exist to get our members the care they need, and we do it pretty well, I think, over 3.8 million. And we've probably earned 60% of the market share and 70% of the health funding in the private market. We've earned that, I think, because we run a good business and we deeply care about our members' health outcomes. And I think for me, I feel at home in brands that really are good for New Zealand, are very customer and member centric, and the culture deeply cares. And I think that's what we have at Southern Cross. I'm very proud to say.
Now, explain how Southern Cross operates, because it's not a business in the usual sense. It's not a company. You're a society. So, what does that mean in practice in terms of how you need to operate?
The Southern Cross brand in New Zealand has two big business groups. It's got what I would call the health-related insurance group, which is your health, life, pet and travel, which I look after. I'm the CEO of the health insurance business and a director on those other product lines. But that is our financial services group, of which I'm part of. And then we've got the healthcare delivery. That is your hospitals, all your JVs, all the white coats and delivering your surgery. Thank goodness I'm not involved in any of that, And so you've got two, what we call funder and providers. Yeah. We're attached by a brand there, but they're very, very different businesses. So the health insurance is actually what's called a friendly society. There's not many of us around, but what it largely means is it's a profit conscious but not profit driven. It sits there, not as a company but as a friendly society. It's got to operate in the interests of the collective membership, and it's there to provision health, to be there for health and sickness, really. And so it operates as a company in every form of it. It's just under our old legal structure, which means it doesn't have shareholders per se. It gives a tax. We don't have to pay tax, but that largely means that we can only do a tight scope of work. We can only look after fund your health and life orientated stuff. So it's a very tight scope of business, but that's a very old status, the friendly society status. But it's like a mutual. I mean, the best way I describe it is like a mutual. We're here for the mutual benefit of the membership.
Yeah. So there's not profits that are needing to be, funded out to external shareholders. Everything really goes back into...
That's right. I mean, we need profits to have the capital to sustain ourselves, but we're not driven by generating a profit. We're driven by getting our members the care they need to get well.
Now, what did you find when you came in to the role?
Well, I think it had good bones. I mean, a company that's been around for 50 years already has got to have good bones. It had good bones. It had wonderful people. Had a very causal-based culture, but I think it lost its energy in its way. And so what I could help with, I think, was, bringing back a bit of ambition. It hadn't grown membership for 20-odd years. And so I could bring, from my Kiwibank and National Bank days, I felt like I could help them get this sort of growth mojo back, build a brand that was a little bit differentiated. I mean, there's many organisations that are for good that go by the wayside. No one cares about your friendly society for goods legal structure at all. It cares about the quality of your experiences and products. And so as a result of a friendly society, we could be very customer driven. I learned that from the National Bank. I learned that from Kiwibank. And so that sense of making sure that we've got relevant proposition for the future. And so a lot of energy has gone into making sure that that's the case. And so I think just really modernising and contemporising, I guess, what was a very heritage business has really been my role as CEO, and to set it up for the next phase.
It's been, 9 years?
Just over 9 years now.
Just over 9 years. If you're looking in at, say, the culture side of the business, what are you most proud of in terms of what's been achieved over that period?
Oh, well, I'm most proud really that we have kept a customer centricity to the organisation. I feel like we're a lot more modern organisation than we were before. I feel like we've got energy and fight, and competitive nature to it. I do feel like we've got a plan and a strategy that will continue to make us more relevant into the future.
Yeah.
But I'm really proud of, I guess, the culture of the organisation. It is a customer-centric, caring, can-do, cause-based organisation. And I think we've probably just, I do believe Southern Cross is a meaningful organisation in the New Zealand context. Health is very meaningful. And I think, I do feel a lot more comfortable that we can be around for 20 or 30 years. That doesn't mean to say that we don't have to fundamentally still change and evolve. That goes without saying. But I do feel like we're a lot more contemporary organisation.
What would you say you had to practically do in terms of stirring change and bringing change from that culture perspective and ensuring that everyone had that customer-centric mindset and focus?
Well, I don't think our compete to win strategy was very clear. So I think the first thing, define reality and give hope. We had to confront that just because we're good, that guarantees nothing. And so I think we had to confront our reality that our risk is irrelevance. Unless we're relevant to, our close to 1 million members, I think we've got about 950,000 members, unless we're relevant to them in 5 to 10 years' time, we're a goner. And so I think confronting that reality that just because we're for good and our intention is pure, that means nothing. And so we articulated a very clear modernisation and contemporisation strategy. And then we were very intentional around the culture that we needed. We were slow and methodical. And so, we became a scaled, agile business. The leadership was focused on delivering the strategy, not running their businesses. We brought in some fresh talent and energy into the business. But we were very intentional around that change. And so, again, I think a lot of the systems were modernised. I think this is the thing. It was underinvested, I felt, for a long, long time. And so we've progressively invested in its technology. And I do think the moments of truth that really matter. Any time I go out there with Southern Cross, I say, well, you're a Southern Cross member. What do you like about us? And they say, at claim time, which is the moment of truth, you make it so easy. And for me, as a friendly society, no one cares about that. But what we care about is our members get what they deserve, what they're paying for in their policy each time, not making it hard to give a profit to a shareholder. And that's the Southern Cross difference, is funding your healthcare when you need it. And so I feel very comfortable in an organisation where actually the shareholder and the customer's interest are fundamentally aligned.
Yeah. And what did that modernisation journey look like?
A significant rebuild. I think all our systems now and all our providers to give instant decisioning your claim time, we're trying to get rid of claims. And an insurer, we're trying to fund all what you're entitled to at the point of sale. So there was a massive amount of systems re-engineering to get instant decisioning at the point of sale. All our mobile app and internet was completely and utterly rebuilt. I come from an internet banking world, and so that's why your mobile phone, we feel like that's your My Southern Cross and your mobile phone. So we were very intentional around making sure that 24/7 you could engage with Southern Cross. All our core infrastructure had to be remodernised. If you think about, we do 17,000 claim lines a day. We largely do that instantly, through, rules-based engines and systems. And so that has to be 100% accurate. It has to be reliable. It has to be delivered every single day. And more than anything else how technology becomes old pretty quickly. So there was a lot of modernisation of systems. Our whole information security posture and our resilience posture needed to be invested in. So again, it's a lot of that. It's like the foundation stuff you don't see in your house, but we've had to strengthen a lot of that.
Yeah. So doing that has then allowed you, I guess, part of the same journey, but modernising the core foundations has allowed you to have an app where people can do those claims quickly, or with some health providers, GPs and so on, where they can manage that, right? And you don't even have to
have to get involved.
Yeah.
It's just doing the core well. I'm a big believer in doing the basics exceptionally well, and so we've really focused on that.
And so what have been the results of that in terms of, if you sort of, look back to 2017 versus today, how do you measure that success?
Well, I mean, membership growth is quite a dramatic up. I think it was about 700,000 and it got as high as 960,000. It's come back in the last couple of years because obviously we've had a massive post-COVID demand. So I think you can see that in the customer growth. You can see that in some of the net promoter score of our members. You can see that in some of the tenure. Yeah, you can see that in some of the transactional volumes that go through. I mean, I think so there's some really good traits there, particularly our brand relevance in New Zealand. So I think we measure all those sorts of things. I think the challenge that we've still got is the affordability of our products. Yeah, and that is to be relevant, you also need to be affordable. And so in our model, the more you use, you pay. I mean, for every $1 of premium, 90 cents pretty much in our model through the long term goes back to pay your healthcare. Only 10 cents in the dollar goes to our operating costs, and that's going to get down to 6 or 7 cents. So,
wow.
So pretty much where a money go around, your premium goes to your claims. And so fundamentally, we have to make sure that over time the private system is actually sustainable. It does the right care in the right setting at the right time, to make sure that it is sustainable, because it's not, we contract with our partners, our healthcare partners, the price. Your price is going up by inflation, but our members are using more and more services. And so that's a wonderful thing, but our members have to pay for it. So we do have to make sure that the private health system actually does the right care, the right setting at the right time, and does that efficiently as well as effectively.
What's driving your members, using more health services? What are the drivers there? The spend is going up.
Well, the health insurance is slightly different. No one says, fantastic, my house burnt down, I got to use my general insurance and my house and contents. In health insurance, people join us for peace of mind.
Yeah.
But they stay with us for value, And so there's almost this sort of sense that I've got Southern Cross, I need to use it to get value. And so we've got 50% of our members that use it all the time, in a sense. And 50% members don't need to use it in any 1 year. Now that 50% changes, but there is a currency and a cadence to health insurance. And over time, we exist to give you the care you need when you need it. That's the reason for us existing. And so we do that 3.6 million times a year. The next 5 or 10 years is how we're relevant to low claimers. I mean, that's the thing in today's world. You've got to be highly relevant to your low claimers. And so that's a large amount of our work around our proposition.
Mm-hmm. And if you sort of stand back and look at how you operate versus, for-profit insurance provider, what would you say the big difference is? There's obviously a difference in terms of how much of the funds that people are paying in their premiums gets used back for their healthcare, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I believe in having a competitive market. I think if you've got competition in your market, it's really, really healthy. And so we've got a number of competitions. Some of them are like us. Some of them are for profit. I'm not questioning motivations around there. I mean, we live and die on our value proposition. That's what matters. So I think healthy competition actually gets you to be better. Yeah. What I'm trying to do at Southern Cross, I'm a deep believer that loyalty really matters, your quality of your experience really matters. And so we'll make different decisions than others that may be product-centric or operationally excellence-centric, and so really we're trying to compete to be different. And so our difference largely manifests, I think, in our culture, like claiming, for example. We just want to make that entitle your benefits. That's our difference, is to make sure that we're operating in your best interest, not the shareholders' best interest every day of the week.
So what's next for Nick Astwick?
Well, yes, September the 30th. Yeah, that'll be 9 3/4 years. As I say, best job I've ever had. Look, I'm just trying to, been very spoilt with sort of National Bank, Kiwibank and Southern Cross. I'm looking to move more into a portfolio career, to sort of get involved with high growth businesses that have got New Zealand ink at their core, that really want to make a dent on the world stage, or the New Zealand stage. And so I'm just looking for a little bit more variety. I think being well conditioned as an executive to turn up, 7 o'clock every day and, work. And so it's just really trying to have more variety, I think. And so there'll be some professional governance roles that I'm really seeking at the moment, and then sweat equity and some equity into high growth New Zealand businesses, because that's what I believe. I'm a big believer in the prosperity of New Zealand, and I'm a big believer in business to try and give that. We need more income as a country, and we do need it to be more equally shared. That's probably those businesses I just want to get involved in.
How big do you think the opportunity is for New Zealand moving forward, and how much of that opportunity is in sort of the high tech business world?
Well, you can probably answer that better than I, but we're building capital markets. We're building an industrial mindset. If you look at Halters and if you look at the rocket labs, the world has never been closer. And so if you've got the mindset that this generation does have, it can reach the world. Never. And when I grew up, you couldn't reach 7 billion people, but now digitally you can. And so I think we're maturing. We're finding some capital. We're building a mindset that can scale. And we can reach the world like we've never have before. And we're turning ideas that we've always been very good at into large-scale businesses. I mean, we're building billion-dollar businesses now rather than $5 to $10 million and selling it. Now, that largely has because of technology. Technology and partnership enables you to scale across the world. And so I think we're just at the start of that. I mean, our country, our GDP is still relatively low, and we're only going to get there by building industry and not selling it early, is actually scaling business and having those benefits brought back to New Zealand. Whether that's employees, higher paid jobs, those sorts of things. That is critical. But technology landscape, is the critical, not just technology businesses, but leveraging technology to reach the world, and make a good return. I want to be part of that journey.
Yeah, that's great. If you were to leave listeners with some tips, whether they're Nickisms or things from that you've learned and things that you live by, what would those things be?
Be ambitious, think big. I mean, I think that is quite critical. I mean, choose to lead. I would say be very intentional in that. Be a champion team, not just a team of champions. I think that's what's critical. I mean, that's what New Zealand, we are, as a country, we value relationships. We do things, we've got a team orientation. So I would say, as I say, build a culture, go for it, think big, and don't sell yourself short.
Fantastic. Anything else you'd like to add, Nick?
No, thanks, Paul. That was fantastic. Thanks for your time.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Great.
Well, I trust you enjoyed hearing from Nick Astwick. The New Zealand Business Podcast is brought to you by One New Zealand and Gorilla Technology. Be sure to listen in to our other episodes featuring many of New Zealand's most successful leaders, including founders such as Sir Peter Beck of Rocket Lab, Brooke Roberts of Sharesies, Sir Rod Drury of Xero, Cecilia and James Robinson of My Food Bag, Sir Michael Hill, and many more. And if you benefited from this episode, be sure to share it with a friend.
The New Zealand Business Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, your strategic and proactive IT partner.